Wonderful. Buenas noches. Good evening. Welcome everyone joining us across the country and maybe across the globe. Tonight, I'm happy to introduce our Cosechando Éxito webinar, Sowing Seeds, focusing on Transplant Surgery Fellowship. I'm Dr. Minerva Romero Arenas. I'm a founding member and the first president of the Latino Surgical Society, and I'm happy to be here with you all tonight. The Latino Surgical Society was established to cultivate, nurture, and support the advancement of Latino surgeons. It's an organization that was founded by three of my good friends and colleagues and myself while we were residents. Dr. Joseph Fernandez More, who's a trauma surgeon at Duke, Dr. Joseph Lopez, who is a pediatric head and neck surgeon in Florida, and Dr. Guesser Ortega, who is a health services researcher and surgical professor at Brigham Women's Hospital. We want to thank our advisory board. We have had the tremendous support of the various names that you see on the screen. I want to thank the advisory board for their support over the past 3 years and specifically acknowledge Drs. Carmen Solorzano and Dr. Maria Soto Green, who are stepping off of the board this year. LSS serves as a vehicle for professional advancement and development. There are opportunities to publish. Our partner journal is the American Journal of Surgery. We also have helped people with nominations to national awards, nominations to participate in organizations, both nationally and internationally, as representatives and work group partners with the American Board of Surgery. You can also learn about opportunities in academics, sit on editorial boards, and there are opportunities for individual and institutional memberships. We have a variety of programming available to our members, including our webinars, including Inside the Operating Room, Cafecito con LSS, Sowing Seeds, which we're hosting tonight, and Pass the Baton. We also have a variety of opportunities with partner organizations, such as the Association of Women Surgeons, through which we've provided a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Award and opportunities for mentorship. And we also recently hosted our second surgical symposium on Latino health, which was hosted at the University of Washington in Seattle. It's a pleasure to introduce you to our executive council, which includes Drs. Joseph Fernandez More and Dr. Joseph Lopez, whom I introduced earlier. We also count on Dr. Chantal Reyna, who is the secretary to LSS. And I want to congratulate and acknowledge Dr. Mecker-Moeller, who is our inaugural AWS LSS visiting professor. So with that, I remind you to consider joining the Latino Surgical Society for a variety of benefits that we've shared with you already, but also for the opportunity for formal and informal mentoring, for building a community of family and friends within surgery, for opportunities for faculty development. And in the future, we also are looking for additional opportunities for patient education. You can connect with us through a variety of methods, including our website, our social media profiles, which are at Latino Surgical, and you can always view our past recorded content on our YouTube channel. You can reach us via email there. With that, I'll stop, and I'm happy to turn the program over to Dr. Elina Serrano.
All right, buenas noches, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. I am Elina Serrano. I am a fourth-year general surgery resident at the University of Washington, and I am very excited to help facilitate this webinar tonight. Joining us today, we have three amazing panelists. We have Dr. Valeria Valbuena. She's a transplant surgery fellow at Northwestern University. Dr. Juliet Emamaullee is an associate professor of surgery at the University of Southern California, Keck School of Medicine. She's a liver and kidney transplant surgeon at Keck Hospital and Children's Hospital, Los Angeles. And she's also a surgeon scientist, and she has an NIH-funded translational immunology lab. Last but not least, we have Dr. Karen Pineda Solis, who's an assistant professor of surgery at the University of Rochester Medical Center. She's a liver, kidney, and pancreas transplant surgeon, and she also specializes in hepatobiliary surgery. For the structure of the seminar tonight, we have some topics that we are prepared to discuss, but if you have any additional questions, please feel free to raise your hand or type in the Q&A section, and we'll continue to monitor those as they come in. To get started, this is a question for everyone on the panel. Can you tell us about why you chose transplant surgery as your career?
I'm happy to start. Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for the opportunity to join um, the webinar. This is an interesting time for me to be sharing all of my thoughts and feelings about transplants as I just started fellowship, and I apologize, I'm a little hoarse. I thought when I came into residency that I was going to do trauma surgery at the University of Michigan, where I trained. We have like a really early exposure to transplant surgery. I had actually been exposed to it in medical school and never really had an interest on it. I mean, I thought it was very cool. I think one of the very first surgeries I sort of first assisted with was a small bowel transplant, but never really became engaged into it until I met my mentors at the University of Michigan. We have an outstanding group there, and they just presented. I mean, transplant surgery is great in any shape or form, but like they presented the opportunity of joining the specialty and like in a way that was very palatable to me at the time. The operations are incredible. The patient population is one that I'm particularly interested on. And the variety of it and the opportunity of being able to make a real, I mean, surgeons in general have access to that opportunity of making kind of real tangible change, but transplant is kind of in its own category. And so that is why I'm 3 months into fellowship.
Dr. Pineda Solis, do you want to share?
Yeah, I'm happy to share. So actually my path was a little also different. I did, general surgery, and I was interested in liver and pancreas. I had exposure for transplantation, but not really too much during my residency. I mean, I grew up and actually trained in Mexico, a lot of part of my career. But when I finished general surgery, I did a hepatobiliary surgery fellowship. But my interest was to do more advanced liver resections that include, vascular reconstructions and, more like crazy advanced surgeries. So I wanted to do this combined program, was like HPV and transplant, because I felt that, transplant is the way that you can have more advance these vascular resections. And I went one of the congress in the, the American HPV Association, and I met one of my mentors there. And I know that he was doing this new surgery out for, liver resections, and I was like, I really want to learn that. So that was kind of my initial idea, but when I started my fellowship, it was combined, and I really fall in love in transplantation. I see like, you really can change the life of the patients. You're seeing the two sides of the coin, right? For one side is a little bittersweet, the sense you have the donor and fortunately they pass away, but then when you put the organs in somebody who are really needed, it's just changed their life. So I fall in love in transplant, and I can say that most of my practice now is more transplantation than actually HPV.
Sorry, guys, I can't turn on my camera because I'm in my car. But, I'm a first-generation high school and college graduate, so I didn't really have much exposure to medicine or science. And so when I was in college, I was pre-med, but I had an advisor that introduced me to research, which I really loved. And so when I was thinking about what I wanted to do with my career at that time, I knew I wanted to do science, but I wasn't sure about medicine. So, and an MD PhD sounded like a lot. So I went to grad school and focused on a PhD in immunology. I was at the University of Alberta, which is in Canada. And at the time I was there, within our islet transplant biology group, my eventual transplant surgeon mentor published an article in the New England Journal of Medicine about the first 9 successful clinical islet transplant patients. And I remember going to that symposium where they announced that paper and the patients were there, and just seeing all of the excitement around that and how really translational research could directly impact patients sort of made me wonder about a career in medicine eventually. And so as I was going through grad school, I had more exposure to clinical medicine, and my surgical mentor, when I got into med school, actually before I even started, took me, the first time I ever went to the operating room was for a donor and a transplant for fulminant hepatitis B in a young woman. And it was just a very transformative experience. And he really encouraged me to consider a career in surgery. And so by the time I started medical school, I had a PhD in transplant immunology and was focused on becoming a transplant surgeon. And so I sort of stuck to that as I went through my medical school, where I did a postdoc in his lab. And then I focused on my surgical training for 7 years. And then I came to USC as a surgeon scientist in 2017.
Thank you to all of our panelists for sharing their personal journey through transplant surgery. My next question is, who should consider applying to Transplant Surgery Fellowship?
I can start. As I mentioned, I fell in love with transplant really early on in my residency, and I did a 7-year residency, so 5 years of clinical and 2 years of research. And so I had a lot of time to think about it. I was really drawn to all of the things that I mentioned earlier about the type of medicine that we practice, the type of patients we take care of, the change that we can make. But it is like, if someone is listening to this seminar and is at all aware of transplant surgery, we also practice in a fastly evolving, very demanding space. And that's not just transplant, that's many areas of medicine, but we're definitely within that kind of pod of demands and kind of pace of life. And so I personally went back and forward a lot trying to figure out kind of what the type of practice and the type of career that I was going to want. And again, I think that when someone is interested, so first you have to love it, but it's like anything. It's like when students are considering surgery and people are like, oh, don't do surgery if you don't like anything else. It's not like that. Everything can be hard. Like, my husband is an oncologist and he has a lot of clinics, he sees a lot of patients. And when I think about that, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is like a big labor of like coordinating care for all these patients. And that's just, that sounds hard to me. And then he thinks about me standing in the OR all day. And I was like, that sounds very hard. So you have to love what you do so that then work doesn't become work and is a thing that you do. And if there's anybody out there that's considering transplant surgery and you like it, I think that giving yourself the opportunity of like seeing kind of all the aspects of it. And I don't think that there is a particular person or type of surgeon or type of resident that is a better fit, but being aware of the demands and the rewards of the specialty is a really good point to start when one is transplant curious. It is awesome. I don't think anybody ever, the people that say, oh my God, transplant surgeons work, I don't think there is a single person that will be like, oh, the transplant surgeon's job is boring. Rest.
Yeah, for me, I think the persons who want to apply is that they need to have passion for transplant, right? It's also a big spectrum of the specialties, a very new specialty. So there are new things constantly. The practice between centers here and there actually are very different. So I think it's a very like new field that personally I never get bored. I always learning something unique, new, and getting amazing day by day. And yeah, I think like you can also find a different kind of practice. Some people decided to do more of, for example, kidney transplant, and they have more, relaxed life, and others are more, livers or combined, or even can you combine to do, scientists between research and doing surgery as well. So I think there are still a good field and a spectrum to choose transplant. But I will also say the same. It's kind of like a very unique and magic field. But yeah, you need to have passion because especially I think the training is very intense. their fellowship, they don't have limitations of hours. So they can be very, very exhausting. But, Valeria can tell you probably she's the happiest woman of the world right now as well.
And what I would say is, transplant among the surgical specialties is one of the most team-focused specialties. We cover each other's patients. We don't often meet our patients until they come in for transplant. So you kind of have to trust the assessment of your partners. And it's also a partnership with the patient. We don't say yes to every single patient either. So everybody's kind of invested in a good outcome. The patients and their families are grateful. Oftentimes they are happy to be participating in research and excited about transplant in general. And I think that it's just one of the most dynamic fields in surgery and medicine. If you look at what we're doing right now with machine perfusion and xenotransplantation and working towards, new ways to do the surgery and so on, including robotics, we're always sort of pushing the envelope, so it's never boring.
Yes, it definitely sounds like transplant is a field full of innovation. I'm sorry, Dr. Pineda Solis, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I forgot to mention that it's very multidisciplinary field. You are never working by yourself. You always have colleagues like nephrologists, hepatologists, infectious disease, anesthesia. So it's a field with a lot of communication with a big group, and you are really seeing the patient like a holistic and whole way. It's not like just one piece. When you have all these meetings with all the specialists, we see all the whole picture. So it's still a very passionate field.
I will piggyback on that. And honestly, as a fellow, it's one of the things that I have always loved about transplant, and even now with kind of long days and long nights, it's still it's the way how we take care of transplant patients is how I will ideally take care of all my patients, right? I was every single morning, at least at my center, there is about 30 people in this call where I'm talking about the patients. It's my patients, our patients. And you'll have the nutritionist there and the nephrologist. Everybody has something helpful to add. And everybody is all of these smart people getting together to, Dr. Emamaullee mentioned, have a good, everybody's invested in a good outcome. And, as much as us as general surgeons and then later transplant surgeons, I like to believe that I'm good at it. The reality is that we're not. There's many things that, we are experts at what we are, and being in that safe space of being I bring in the surgical expertise. And I have no issues asking questions, asking to be educated, asking for an opinion on something, not having to manage everything, not being in a silo, all of that, not making these big decisions about really important things by ourselves. I see my faculty doing that all the time with themselves, but also with their partners on hepatology and nephrology, selecting organs, selecting recipients. You're working always in a team, and you just feel a lot better about these decisions that you're making for patients. You're never alone.
Thank you all for sharing. We do have a question from the audience that I think may be directed towards Dr. Emamaullee. Someone is, Luis Arias Espinosa is asking, how important was the PhD basic science research in your career development?
You don't have to have a PhD or do basic science to go into transplant surgery. If you like doing basic and translational research, transplant surgery is a great space to be in, because we, like I said, there's a lot of really interesting transplant research available to do, and a lot of most transplant programs, I would say, are academically affiliated. And so there's an environment that fosters research, but there's also really important research being done in patient not everybody in my group does research, for sure. I'm kind of the most research focused person. So it worked out for the kind of job I was hoping to get, but it's definitely not necessary. And it's not necessary for being competitive for fellowship either.
All right. Yeah, and it's really important to highlight that there's many different paths within transplant surgery. And if you have other interests that may not be necessarily basic science, if you're interested in patient outcomes and healthcare disparities, there are a lot of opportunities to make an impact on the field. Moving on to the next question, transplant surgery fellowships are coming up, are opening up soon. If you can comment on what are the qualities that you think transplant surgery programs look for in a transplant fellow?
I think that in general, the things that make you a good doctor and a good surgeon, and that will make you, good at taking care of patients instead of any setting, is like the foundation. It's like your general surgery foundation. A solid, well-rounded is what I believe most places are looking for. A lot of people will worry sometimes about the degree of exposure, how ready do you come in? And the reality is that exposure to transplantation is anchored at academic centers. And so there's actually a lot of people that, like I had the great benefit of spending a lot of time in transplant, but there are people that, they fell in love during the one and only organ transplant that they saw, and then they pursue the career based on that. And so I think that programs want to see that you are ready to take care of patients, right? It is a fellowship. I think for the great majority of programs, at least the ones that I had the opportunity of interviewing at, you're effectively working in the operating room, you're training, of course, but like in many other settings, you're effectively working as a junior partner. And so you have to, at that point that you graduate from general surgery residency, you have to be ready for some of that responsibility. And that has to be demonstrated by mostly like your letters of recommendation of whether or not you're going to be a good team member, to that point of how we work on teams. I think that by the time that you're done with residency, I sincerely hope that a lot of people are ready to work that play nice in the sandbox. Because if you don't, like, transplant's going to be real tough. Like there's no kings or queens in this hill. Like everybody has a voice and an opinion in the care of transplant patients. And so you have to be very well suited for like good communication. And that's something that at least I feel I personally believe helps when people are starting any fellowship, but specifically transplant. And then of course, just like Dr. Pineda always mentioned, like you have to be enthusiastic about this and willing to work. And I think that the enthusiasm for transplantation is something that often comes and shines through in your letters of recommendation.
I can just comment on how we think about them, or how I think about them at my place. So you have to be eligible for a California medical license, and that's difficult for international graduates in California. So it's something that if you are an international graduate, knowing ahead of time kind of what your status is, or reaching out to a program to find out, just kind of to know where things are easier is important. Unless you've done your residency training in the US, I would say, like, we also cannot sponsor visas. So some of those logistical things you're going to have to figure out on a case-by-case basis. And then beyond that, in terms of the applications, we usually get around, I would say, 50 or 60 applicants for 2 spots. But there's generally everybody matches around the country. And so how we prioritize is the same kind of stuff, how you think about residency applications, the commitment to the field, the quality of the reference letters. We do look at ABSITE scores to a certain degree just to get a sense of, are people going to pass their boards and pass their transplant exams that are part of the fellowship now. For me personally, we're a fairly liver intense and high acuity liver program. And so to have had exposure to that in residency, I think is important, because at least for us, because if you realize you don't love that, then you have to love it. You can't sort of be like, I think it's okay. If you don't love that and you come to my place, you're not going to be happy, because you're going to be drinking liver from the fire hydrant a lot of times, and operating in the middle of the night, and doing long living donor and pediatric cases and things like that, in situ split donors. And so you really have to have a passion for that to rank highly for me. It's not to say that you won't be competitive if you don't, but for people that are at community programs, prioritizing doing an elective at a center that has good liver exposure, so you can get letters from those people, is really important. And then I would just say, personal statements. A lot of people have different reasons why they're interested in transplant. It doesn't have to be anything fancy or, life-changing. Some people have had personal experience where they have a family member or friend that's gone through transplant, or they just had a really awesome rotation in their training. And I think being sort of just honest about that and explaining kind of why you want to be in this fairly rigorous and intense field is important, because that'll drive some of the questions during the interview process for sure. We do read those.
Yeah, I think at the end you want to match, what the fellow wants and what the program is giving to. And I think both they need to be kind of the same page. I mean, as I mentioned, there are a few programs that they have this HPV and transplant. I think there are like 7 programs. And there are many, many programs that they just do kidneys, and others they do, this combination, and others they do a more of living donor, liver transplant, and small bowel. So it's a lot like what you are looking for the program. I think it's very important to match that, and also just to align what the candidate wants, because if they are saying, "Oh, I'm interested, to do just kidney transplant," and it's the same. Our program is kind of balanced 50-50, and we are like, what's going to happen in livers, right? So they need to combine both. I think if you are an IMG, it's important to check the visa, because not all the programs are, support visas, or also to see all your, for IMGs, the steps, because some programs are, able to support H-1B visa, but you need a step 3. So it's important just to do a good research about those areas. And I agree with the personal statement. I think it just needs to be very transparent, really, like the reason that why you want to go in the field. And for me, probably the interview could be one of the most important part. You want to see that you are able also to match it's a very long hours working together. So you really want a team player, somebody you can spend there for, go in a plane, go back, to be together for 10-12 hours in a very stressed situation. So I think this is important also, the interview. You can have a sense of the person who's applying, how honest, transparent are, and if they are aligning with the intention for the program.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we already reviewed some of this information, but Dr. Valbuena, as someone who recently applied to fellowship, can you describe the specific components of the application and give us an overview of the application timeline?
Yeah, it's kind of late. And it's funny because I was thinking of applying to transplant ever since I was a PGY 2. And then the timeline is consistent, but then not through the year. So usually the applications open in the spring of, so I guess I will backtrack myself. So you apply the year before your chief year. That's important for people who are still in training at least in the US. That timeline will look different. Maybe you're an international medical graduate and then you're in practice. So when you are still in training, you apply your PGY 4 year and you apply in the spring. I believe it's usually around February the applications open. Applications for transplant fellowship are a little bit different than for other places, because even though they open on the same date for everybody, like the time by which stuff needs to be in, right? Like when people apply for residency, it was like by October 8th, there is a little bit of variability by program. And that's actually, it's a minute detail, but it's something that is important for anybody who's out there who's thinking, you will find it out, but listen, you can hear it here first. Some places have different deadlines of when your materials are due. And so even though the easiest thing to do, right, will be to submit everything by X or Y date, whenever it opens, I think that the date that is displayed on the San Francisco match, which is not ARIS, is the SF match that we're going through today, is actually the last possible date for you to submit things. And the majority of programs, especially the big academic programs, actually start their dates are a lot earlier. The point of that is that whichever date it sets on the website, you have till to submit things. That's not the real one. So you have to go and look at program by program. And a couple of places I had to call and ask. And then the easiest thing is just to submit it early. I was surprised by how bare bones the transplant application was. That's one thing. I remember I allotted myself like a vacation to fill it. And then I was like, oh my God. It's like, my personal statement, my letters, and, my CV. And it's actually very straightforward to fill. It's nothing like you don't have to type a bunch of things or anything like that. But then because it's very like, succinct and to the point, you need to make sure that like your things are like ready, proofread, just like in residency. Do have someone read you, so you have a standard personal statement. Have someone read your personal statement. I don't review for fellowship, but I review for residency and I review for medical school. And there is nothing from a reviewer standpoint more jarring than like finding a bunch of typos or things like that on a personal statement. It's generally a page. There is no word limit that I remember. And then your CV is just on a standard format. Your letters are honestly, at least I tend to think, and Dr. Emamaullee and Dr. Pineda can correct me if I'm wrong, one of the most important parts of your recommendation. Transplant's an extremely insular field. There is not that many of us. Everybody kind of knows each other. And so like the recommendation of the, people you have trained with, but especially if you have had a transplant experience and hopefully have a transplant mentor will matter. It matters for them to say that you got real good hands and you can be trained, right? It's a highly technical specialty. And so spending time on those letters and, having the meetings to request them, doing it ahead of time. I did it. So going back on the timeline, like you should be requesting your letters. If you're doing your any sort of rotation in your PGY 4 year in transplant, which I believe a lot of people do kind of early on, plan for that rotation. Maybe not to be on like for me it was hard to fix because I was coming back from research, and so I was like trying to like learn how to take care of patients again. So I did mine in like October, and then I requested my letter shortly after. Generally, early fall is like the best time to do that, have that experience, request your letters, and then sort of have all your materials ready. Interviews usually happen in the spring. They're rolling interviews for a couple of places, so you can have interviews all the way out until May, which is another transplant specific thing that I found out during the cycle. Interview days are usually about 6-7 hours long, and they're all on Zoom now. And I think that we're probably going to stay on Zoom for the foreseeable future. And the match happens at the very end of June, July, if I'm correct. So by the time that you either start your chief year or have just finished a PGY 4 year, you should know. And that's kind of the gist of it. Have your things done, have them on time, have someone check them. And then one additional thing is that like if there is a specific place that you're interested on, these applications are even smaller focused. Some people apply very broadly. I think at some point during the program, we're going to talk about selecting programs. I was very targeted on my application because I kind of knew, just to what Dr. Emamaullee and what Dr. Pineda said, like kind of the experience that I wanted. And it had some locations restraints. And so knowing kind of what programs you're interested on is not necessarily like, oh, I'm going to go to, the big names or whatever it is. It's actually not as important as knowing like, do you want to do liver? Do you want to do kidney? Do you want to balance training? Do you want any pediatric experience? That's huge. In a lot of places, you end up doing an extra year, but a lot of the pediatric transplant surgeons have just trained in adults. And if you go to a program that doesn't have any pediatric experience and you're interested in doing that, you're going to find yourself having to do an extra year. So those are some of the highlights of the application timeline.
Thank you, Dr. Valbuena. Can you comment more on the letters of recommendation? How many are needed? And then who should you ask for letters of rec?
So you need 3. You need a letter from your chair, your program director, and that's an important thing to know. It can be either. And then your other 2 letters should come. Ideally, if you're in a program that has a transplant division, it is an informal recommendation that your division head, which is technically the most senior person in your program, will hopefully write you a letter, and a close mentor. So I think that if you're not in a transplant program and your mentors are non-transplant, and for whatever reason you're interested in transplant, is that a requirement that you have to have the letter of a transplant surgeon in your dossier? But it just doesn't quite make sense that you haven't had at least one experience with a transplant surgeon. Now you're applying into transplant fellowship. So I think that the great majority of people will have at least and Dr. Emamaullee and Dr. Pineda can comment on this. It it's almost like a pseudo requirement. Like you should have a transplant surgeon write you a letter. And if you don't have a transplant program, add your program, then considering doing it in a way so you can get not only that experience, but also that letter. So it's three. Actually, one thing I will say for people that this is not for me at all. This is something that my program did for me and for one of my colleagues who also was applying the same year, is that we have had a lot of experience with our group, and you could only ask for the 3 letters, right? So one of the program director for my home program actually did a composite letter in which she requested comments from all of our 7 or 8 staff. And then he like included some of that commentary he said that he was doing that for our home applicants because he believed that it provided a more like wholesome view of the applicant. And then like with like the identifier of the surgeon who provided the comment. It's almost think about like the MSP, that letter, composite letter that you get. He kind of created that for the 2 of us on the way of our formal letter. And that was something that was commented on during my interviews, that they really liked that because it was almost as if you were having, 4 recommendation letters with like one little sentence. Thank you, Sat Waits.
Thank you so much, Dr. Valbuena, for reviewing the application timeline and the different components of the application. The next question that I have for all of our panelists is, what are the things that we can do to make our application more competitive ahead of the application cycle?
I think it's important, as you mentioned something like that, Valeria, that, some residents, they don't have a strong exposure in transplant in the program, so sometimes they don't have it. So at least you need to see that they go somewhere else for for a month. Of course, you are having interest in transplant, any publication, any presentation, any abstracts, of course, give you something much stronger to apply. Every year we are seeing, the competition is getting harder and harder, and everybody, are trying to build up part of the CV. However, I think we have seen some residents that were interested, I don't know, in endocrine surgery all the residency, and they changed the last year. And I think also that's totally fine. I mean, I don't think it's a particular red flag at the end. You need to, there's no reason that why really they change, right? But most of the programs are academic, so I think to show some academic interest or kind of some research, of course, going to help you for that background. Yeah, I would say those ones are, for me, the part that we are probably taking more interest.
I would say one thing, again, for me, I can't speak for like all my group and everybody, but people that seem to have very strong geographic restrictions, like they only want to be in Southern California, like that is a bit of a challenge as an applicant for me, because the measure of our program is how well we place our fellows into jobs. That's a big measure. And if people are very restrictive, the transplant job market is already pretty tight. And so it can make it really hard to get your graduates that you spend a lot of time training into a good job. And so I view applicants that clearly are willing to kind of prioritize their training if they can. I mean, there's obviously some people have their personal lives and things going on, but people that are willing to come to us because they think it's the best training program that fits their career goals and are willing to kind of come and spend a couple of years with us and then go where the best job is for them is attractive for me.
Okay, that takes me to my next question. What should applicants consider when selecting a transplant surgery program? And then specifically to Dr. Valbuena, how do you go about finding the program that best suited your needs and interest? Were there any resources in particular that you used to screen programs and learn about them?
So you can find, so the beauty of transplant is that everything is public. So you can actually find very easily how many, or experience, I guess I'll backtrack myself. you need to be at a place that does enough transplants to learn how to do transplants. So I think that there's a variety of programs that offer different volumes. But the minimums for graduation with the transplant certification are like the minimums, right? Like you want to be able to kind of see everything and do everything. And so volume is huge and volume is important. And knowing what those volumes are, sometimes they get volunteered early on, sometimes they don't. It's actually very easy. It's like a word of mouth thing, but also you can also just find it on OPTN. Kind of if you're in an area or region or looking at a particular area of the country, or you heard that X place or Y place are very good, you can usually gather some of that information. As like the very first thing that Dr. Pineda asked me is like, oh, how many livers are they doing? It's always a moving target too, so things can change from year to year. One or two people leave to a different job and suddenly the liver volume can change. The liver volume is usually actually one of the big if you're looking for a whole balanced liver experience, one of the things that you should look at. But also, if you have decided that you are trying to pursue more of one organ of another one, that's also another important consideration, right? If you're in love with liver transplantation and you know that you want to be a pediatric liver transplant surgeon, or that you really want to do living donor, for example, like I feel like at this point, everywhere is doing a little bit of everything. However, for training, you're looking for volume. And so I think that that's one of the things that you want to think about. The living liver donation numbers are a little bit more elusive and not as easy to access, but something you can definitely find by inquiring with active trainees at places, and even during your interview day. I was raised in a tradition of being trained kind of wholesomely, and then like deciding what I wanted to do in terms of, or like in terms of, you're going to do liver, are you going to do kidneys, are you going to do pancreas, are you going to do the kids? And so I decided when I started looking for a place to train, that I wanted to be trained multi-visceral and that I wanted to have a broad experience. And that was kind of my focus. And I think is one that was given to me by my mentors, and one that is very reasonable. Even if for whatever reason you end up going one way or another one, like being trained kind of in a balanced way on all the organs, I think that there are many benefits to that. Even if you end up doing mostly kidney and pancreas, like having had a robust liver transplantation background is not going to hurt anybody, just about anybody. And then the pediatric piece is important if you're interested in the children. I think that for me, talking with people like that had gone into were active transplant fellows, have gone through the neuro interview cycle recently, was very important. Like that's probably the most important piece. I had a particular colleague who kept a spreadsheet. I mean, everybody interviewed some more different, but she kept a spreadsheet with notes. That's kind of the type of person she is, and she sort of shared that spreadsheet with me at some point, so I was able to have some pointers from programs. And so having those conversations beforehand is important. And Dr. Emamaullee mentioned something that is very important, that you really, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how well trained you are if you can't get a job. So, and half of or 2/3 of successfully placing is, how good of an applicant you are, how good of a surgeon you become. But you also have to be able, like a track record of placing fellows well is incredibly important, because that speaks levels of the commitment of the staff and the program to placing the fellows, right? The fellows are, the applicant itself, it doesn't have it to secure the job. That's a different thing. But, if you're looking at programs and you're looking for, eventually getting a job, which is, I think it was what we're all trying to do, investigating what the track record of placement is very important. Investigating if those placements are for transplant jobs on organ of choice is important. And those are some of the things that I did.
I would
Any
also
other
just
thoughts?
add that the advanced stuff like pediatric liver, like living donor liver, like to some degree, I guess it depends on if you go to a few places, but even pancreas, like you're not going to come out of fellowship with full competency in those spaces. Within our society, we kind of expect that those things will be mentored peer to peer as a faculty, because there's just not enough volume. They're not going to let fellows do splits. and pediatric livers. You can see a lot of surgery and assist a lot of surgery and learn a lot, but getting your, becoming primary surgeon is something that will take some time once you're a faculty, if you go into that specialty. So I don't think people expect you to come out saying, oh, I'm ready to be doing living liver donors. And if you go interview for jobs and say that, it'll probably be a red flag. And so, but if you want exposure to those things, certainly you can consider that in the places you are looking at. And the last thing I would say is that if you're in a fortunate situation, sort of by serendipity, where you're at a place where it seems like there's a good chance that they'll bring you back, it might be worth, and you're interested in that job, might be worth talking to your mentors there about where they think you would get training that would fit within what they would expect you to do on the way back. One of our second year fellows is going back to his own institution with a pediatric focus. So we've sort of worked with him to make sure he has as much exposure to that as possible.
Well, those were all the questions that I had prepared. I'll open up to our panelists if there's any additional comments. And then we have one more additional question from one of our participants. Then the question again from Luis Arias Espinosa.
Well, I was just gonna say one thing I'll say. Sorry, guys. Now I'm making dinner at home. There's gonna be a lot of people that aren't in transplant that are gonna tell you all the reasons why you shouldn't do transplant, and like why there's gonna be no jobs and why the training is terrible and the lifestyle is terrible and all that. So if you're really committed to transplant, you kind of have to like mute those people and focus on the mentors who want you to be successful. So I just would say don't be discouraged by that, because I heard that so much. I had 2 kids in residency and a lot of people were like, it will be terrible for you, but I love my career. And so I think that's fairly common. I don't know if the other people on the panel experience that, but don't be discouraged by that sort of stuff.
People love to hate on transplant, and some of it I see it, but at the same time I'm like, I don't know. I woke up yesterday doing helping on a very first of its kind procedure. I'm like, I don't know how many people get to say that and so you do. I will agree. You have to sort of put your blinders on, especially during training, because it's the same thing. I think when I was applying into surgery, even worse. And people are like, oh, you can't do this because you're a woman. And I was like, it's like everything. I'm like, if you are committed to it and you love it, I think it's going to be trying. I think that's, if you come into it thinking that it's going to be a walk on the park, you might find yourself very surprised, but it's also going to be awesome. So.
Yeah, I think you are going to, hear multiple thoughts about to go or not go, but it's a very fulfilling field. It's and most of the patients, compared with another surgical specialties, the patients are super grateful with you. They will remember, they still send you letters about, the new liver they have, or, it's the birthday of their new liver. So, and they still very, very grateful. And personally, it's very fulfilling for my life. So even that it's hard sometimes, and some nights you are all night awake, you're still feeling like, okay, I'm doing this. I have a, real purpose in my life, and I found that purpose. So yeah, don't get discouraged. I agree.
And then we have questions from one of our participants. I think this relates to balancing the research career with providing patient care. And the question is, how much of a routine are you able to maintain?
Maybe that's for me. I mean, what I would say is transplant is a call-based specialty for the most part. And so when I'm on, and when I'm off, my partners are taking care of the patients. And so it actually allows for some protected time to actually be kind of continuous, like a week at a time, which is helpful for me. Now, of course, if you choose, you can participate in liver selection and tumor board and kidney selection and the adult liver selection. I mean, you could spend 10 hours that week in meetings. And so I kind of make a point of trying not to do that when I'm on my protected research time, because it's a bit disruptive, but it's one of the more friendly specialties in terms of carving out time for research, in my opinion. I do about 7 to 10 days of call in a month.
It's a little more clinical, and I do some research more in outcomes. So I don't have really a protected time at this moment, but it's kind of similar. When you are, you are on call, you are on call. When you are off, it's off, and it's kind of very difficult to predict. It's the only kind of like, very different with another field with surgery. We depends of the donors and so those things are out of our hands and our control. So they could be weeks that they are super intense and a lot of work, and others could be a little more light. So it's difficult, to predict sometimes. I have some scheduled cases from general surgery. I do, some robotic hernias with some, patients with post-transplant. And I do some, living donor kidney transplant. That is kind of the scheduled things, but again, most from our deceased donors. It's a little bit unpredictable, but is yes, when you are on call, you are kind of working, and when you're off, is also it's able to maintain balance.
Perfect. Are there any additional questions from the audience? I don't see any more in our Q&A. I would like to thank all of our panelists today for carving out time out of their busy schedule to join us today and share about their experiences in transplant surgery. And I would also thank you all for joining us for the 4th installment of the Sew and Success series, as we plan to continue to highlight various fellowship programs in surgery. Thank you to all of our participants who tune in this evening. If you're interested in learning more about organization or becoming a member, you can find us at LatinoSurgicalSociety.org and on various social media channels at Latino Surgery. And the recording for this event will be shortly uploaded into the YouTube channel.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. Have a good night. Buenas noches.
Good night, everyone.